before, actually. I ran this session about a year ago, and I went through to go and see what the latest information was with relation to engagement this week. And if there is anybody out here who has other information that they want to share, please do feel free to, because one of the things that I think is really helpful about these webinars is the learning that goes on in the chat, where people get to chat to each other and actually make links and connections. But fundamentally, if we talk about the topic of engagement, and I was to say, how might we define it? Well, I'll throw that open if anyone feels able to give me a definition in the chat. While you're thinking about what you might describe it as, I'll reflect on when I first came across the term employee engagement. It must be at least 20 years ago, when I was working in a learning and development role within Siemens. And at that time, it was Gallup did a lot of the stuff on engagement. And actually the research I've been looking at this week, Gallup is still all about engagement. Now, certainly that's because they have written an engagement survey and copyrighted a set of questions that is clearly very lucrative. But is that employee engagement? Is that the only definition of employee engagement? I don't know. What do you think? So tell me, what do you think of employee engagement? I remember that they used to say that that was the extent to which someone wants to go the extra mile for a company. So that was the willingness to go the extra mile for the company was the Gallup definition that I had. Yeah, commitment and the willingness to go above and beyond, says Laura. Totally. And I think that is key, isn't it? If you are fully engaged, you are willing to do more, but it's more than that. So as Julie said, it's feeling you're part of a positive culture where you feel engaged and belonging. And that is an interesting point, because I've been seeing more and more about this sense of, do we have a sense of belonging? And I'm sure that will correlate with engagement. And of course, when we look at this hybrid working environment, is that why we should be a little bit more cautious or concerned for engagement, in that people maybe don't have that same sense of belonging? So there's two other definitions here. So some of any of the roots of the information I'm sharing with you today, some of it is from the CIPD, their report, and they do lots of stuff on engagement. And some of it's from Gallup, and some of it's just generally out there from various sources. And in the Gallup definitions, they talked about, they looked at the research that was out there in terms of engagement, and talked about it being your personal role engagement. So when you actually felt emotionally, cognitively, and physically connected to your work. And I suppose that's where you might have very meaningful work if you're in something which is service, or you just really love your job, maybe research or whatever that might be. Of course, the challenge might be that not everybody has a job that lends themselves to that. So how do you engage those? Then there's the definition which is about work engagement, which is saying vigor, so energy, dedication and absorption in work activity. Maybe you might say that you're in the flow of working when you're really, really effective, so you're fully engaged in something there. And as I say, this willingness to go the extra mile for the company. I mean, fundamentally, it's often being told, I think the McLeod review said that there were over 50 definitions of engagement. And I think everything I'm seeing so far in the chat, feeling recognised, supported and valued, that is definitely, that's both a feeling, but actually it's a verb that we could do to engage people, to recognise, support and value our people. So it's an interesting term in terms of when we think about it, and it's often easier to see whether we're engaged or disengaged. One of the pieces of research, I think I'll come back to it later, that I saw this week suggested that 85% of people worldwide, this was Gallup, so were disengaged, was what they said, which is fairly worrying when you look at what engagement is supposed to drive. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. So what the drivers of engagement are, what it is as an output of engagement are. But fundamentally, it's about our ability to feel that we are fully engaged, we're able to express our preferred selves at work. And they say that actually some of this links to things like strengths. There's an emphasis more towards strengths. So if you feel that you can express yourself, you can play to your strengths, maybe feel connected to others, then that's going to help you to be engaged. So in theory, we can do that remotely, but is it harder? Is it harder with hybrid? And that's what Julie's saying, it has an impact on that sense of belonging, isn't it? So let's have a look at you guys. Excuse me. I can't see how you answer. This is just to get you interacting a little bit yourself. So I'm going to launch a poll, and for you to think, in the context of work or the company of the employer that you work for, how engaged would you say that you feel personally? And I don't know what answer you're giving, so don't worry, you can say whatever you like. Just have a think yourselves, and that'll be an interesting one for you to feel. And it's interesting, looking at the skills and employment survey said that at a day-to-day level, just over half of UK workers usually feel quite enthusiastic about their jobs. Now, this bit of information was pre-COVID. 1 in 3 felt full of energy, and over half were willing to work harder than they had to. But a fifth of people felt under excessive pressure. Another fifth felt exhausted. I feel like I've got too many numbers here. And a fifth say they're likely to quit their job in the next year. So that was a skill and employment survey from a couple of years ago. And it would be interesting to see whether or not that has actually got worse or otherwise. The reality is that we do feel that work has become more intense, and perhaps with less of that social interaction, which helps dissipate pressure. It could well be that people do feel then they're not letting go of their work. Maybe they've not got the commute either. They're not sort of decompressing, and that could mean that people are finding it harder for us to therefore remain and be really engaged. So let's see how engaged we are here on our poll. So most of you have gone moderately engaged. We've got a nice little natural, I suppose, normal distribution here, with a few slightly engaged and a few extremely engaged, and thankfully none of you not at all. And of course, I guess that would make sense, because if you weren't at all engaged, you probably wouldn't be bothering to take part in give up your lunch break to go on a webinar, right? So that does say there's something that you're engaged about overall. And actually, before I ask you in the poll how your score might change today to otherwise, tell me in the chat, what is it that interests you about engagement in your organisation or your culture right now? What made you decide to come onto this particular webinar? Was it something that is a hot topic for you at the moment? Is it just because actually you've finally got a little bit of a quieter time because it's Easter? Is there something that you're trying to do with regard to engagement that you'd like to get out of this? Because we might find that more than one person has got the same thing. So do tell us what that might be. So one of the things when we're looking at the Good Work Survey Index is that they said that discretionary effort, which is linked to engagement, was greater amongst managerial and professional employees. And you could see that these might be the people who are working remotely. They would be more empowered to work remotely. They said it's lower in administrative roles and lowest in manual and casual work. So that whole level of having that discretionary effort, being able to be flexible, is quite an interesting one there. So let's see what we've got. So recent, just understanding the impact of hybrid on engagement, Jackie's saying, transferable information for college students. Actually, how do you engage your college students? And are they, Orlando, are they remote, or are you able to have people face to face now or not? So you've got S. Bartlett, I'm going to guess it's Steve, but I might be wrong. New hybrid working policies got mixed reviews. Interesting. What is it that people are less keen on? Are they less keen on coming into the office, or are they less keen on whatever the changes might be? You want to be more engaged, and for that to have a ripple effect within your team. Good for you, Carrie. Absolutely. Let's find out what's going to do that. Poor results in a recent survey. So Steve, yeah, I've got a few people that I've spoken to recently about exceptionally poor results in a couple of organizations. Retention, absolutely. Right. Great. Okay, thank you very much. You're both, are you, Orlando? So we want to think about this in terms of how we can utilize this in terms of formalizing our hybrid working. Fine. So staff don't want to come back to the office. And that is a really tricky one. I think that's one of the trickiest things we've got at the moment with engagement, because people want to have flexibility. They don't want to have to take things away, and some don't want to come in at all. Okay, so they've moved away. How on earth do we engage them and create that sense of belonging? That is so tricky, isn't it? Because fundamentally, it's going to become more and more difficult to do that unless we find alternatives. So we'll come back obviously to look at all these and all those other things and those legitimate challenges, and I'm sure it's helpful for other people to see that others are having the same problems that you've got, the same challenges. Thinking of yourselves, though, I'm going to ask you a second poll question. How would you say your personal engagement score compares to pre-pandemic working? Is it lower? Is it the same? Are you unaffected? Or I might find it again for you. How does it compare? If you think about yourself, because it's always interesting, isn't it? When you're in an HR role, you're actually having to do it for everybody else. How do you think you compare? And maybe what's the reason for that? So without giving the results away, quite a lot of you are the same, but quite a few of you are higher. You are more engaged. So if you have answered as you are more engaged, then what's made you more engaged? Because you might have some of the secrets. So Steve, you've been working at home for 10 years, so it makes no difference. So you do stuff. So how do you, Steve, have a sense of belonging and feel engaged in the organisation you're in? Or how does the organisation give you that sense of belonging? Or do you think it all comes from you? When we went back to that first definition of engagement, where it's that person themselves who you've got that intrinsic value to your work, you actually enjoy what you do. So have a think. So if you've said, if there is a difference and you're happy to share one of it, what is it that's caused it? Because what's made you feel more engaged might make someone else more engaged. Or what's made the difference to you, and is it transferable? Equally, if you're feeling less engaged, what has made the difference to you? Because again, that might be something that we can learn from each other. So while you reflect on those, I'm sharing those results there. I'll go through some of the other content that I've pre-prepared, and then we'll come back to the chat. So the issues, so you're the same, Steve, but there is less and less team interaction, which has been made worse. So were you going in some of the time, but Steve, you were having that? Why, if you were a home worker before, as the team interaction got less? Because you can't go to one place and see people? Or have we all stopped talking? We just transact when we're talking to people through work? It's interesting, isn't it? What's the cause potentially? I mean, the reality is we are right to be concerned, because it's a predictor of job performance. So some of us may feel that we're performing still there, but actually how are we recharging? As I alluded to earlier, this is what the Gallup 2022 survey said. It said that actually only 15% of employees worldwide are engaged. And if you were comparing the top and bottom quartile business units in terms of engagement scores, these are the sort of differences they suggest that you can get. So the difference between the most engaged and the least engaged in the same type of organisation, they reckon that led to up to an 81% difference in absenteeism, 18 to 43% difference in turnover. That was to do with the type of organisation. Safety incidents, quality, productivity, so more sales in the more engaged group, and profitability. So this is what they said in terms of their workplace outcomes report. So undoubtedly, it's something that we're right to be thinking about. So I've already got you doing this for me. So if you thought about in the chat, so I'm just going to look at what you've said here, and if anyone else is happy, just say, what do you think drives engagement for you personally? I mean, for me, I think it's about when I'm really interested in something and I feel like I'm really, really interested in the work that I'm doing. I mean, I'm lucky because I run my business, so I have lots of choice, but it's when also I'm doing things that maybe I feel good at, that I feel I'm working to my strengths, as opposed to things that I find hard and I don't enjoy. Probably makes a difference for me. But I also think it's quite easy to get out of the habit of seeing people and actually making that time to be part of a team. And in there, we might feel that we're okay on our own, but actually there are huge benefits from that natural energy you get from interacting with others. So just looking at your chat, so yes, flexibility, Anne-Marie, that flexibility really helps, so, and you enjoy your role, so you wouldn't want to lose that flexibility. And flexibility, often it's, maybe we're able to do exercise or pick a child up from school or whatever it was, have that extra bit of quality of life that we might not have been able to do before if we were commuting. Yeah, so it's much easier to make people feel part of a team when we're all working in the office. When you're working from home, you might as well work for yourself. But obviously, if we don't all work for ourselves, and that in itself can be quite isolating, working for yourself, because you've got no support network. So it is interesting, how do we feel part of a team? Because it's only because we were physically close to each other, right? I mean, it doesn't really mean that you are part of a team, you're just in the same proximity. It is interesting how it's so much more difficult. So everything's become a bit more transactional, saying Steve, less office interaction from a team or personal perspective. So when we actually do get together, you feel like you've got to get down to business. If you get onto a Zoom or a Teams meeting, you've got to get straight down to business to have less of that personal conversation. So you're more engaged now, you're back in the office. So you have felt a difference about being in the office or not, but you like to have the balance. So you don't want it totally taken away. So the person who is saying that they've had a negative response to your hybrid working policy, is that because people are perceiving that they're losing the flexibility that they've currently got? Because certainly that is something that people do want to keep generally when you look at things. It's how do you then invite them to come and actually have that teamwork? So you want to be able to learn, grow and explore, Kate, more flexibility, feeling part of the team, having the same objective, achieving things together, part of something bigger, being valued. Yes, to feel like you're adding value, those two fit together. So some of this is where you can see feeling like I'm doing a great job and seeing the impact of my work. So this I put on social media this week that when I looked at the drivers of engagement, actually a lot of this is exactly the same as it's always been. And a lot of it actually comes down to how we're managed, to our line managers, or if we are line managers, what we're doing. So even though we're not seeing people all the time, making sure that we have clarity about when we are delivering something, someone explains or recognizes that we've delivered value, they value what we do, they provide us with the opportunities to learn and grow. You can see that you're doing things. I think that makes quite a big difference. And though a lot of that is in the gift of your people managers. The challenge we've got with remote working is very many people managers weren't very skilled before the pandemic. And now in a hybrid environment, they feel they're even less, they're more out of their depth. So it's making sure that our people managers know and they know and have the skills and the permission and expectation to manage effectively, which is performance management, but with a real emphasis on the individual and on recognition and giving feedback and ongoing conversations. So in terms of this, these are some of the drivers of engagement, and these correlate very much with what you said already. Now, I've got a poll here. I'm going to get you to choose one of these. Oh, sorry, I didn't share it. So on the engagement score before, 53% of you said you were more engaged, 32% the same, and 16% lower. Now, again, that's interesting. I don't doubt that you are totally representative of the population because you actually have come on this webinar on this topic. So you're sufficiently engaged to find out more about it. But it's great that numbers of you are more engaged, and these ideas we have here as to what engages you. So one final poll, don't worry, I won't break with any more polls. So let me, I just thought we'd give you the opportunity here, looking at these. Now, this is me being very cruel because I'm only allowing you to have one question answer, and I'm sure there would be multiples. If you had to pick the top driver engagement for you, which one would you pick? Which is the most important one, in your opinion, to use? All of these, by the way, are relevant, right? All of these are drivers of engagement. So having a supportive manager, having a clear role and understanding how it aligns with strategic purpose. So that is something obviously that a manager can support with, but it's also how we, if we're leaders in an organization, make sure that everybody understands what the purpose is. So some of this is about communication. So if organizations haven't found a way to regularly communicate what the purpose of the organization is, how we're doing, and how our roles and our objectives align, then we're missing a trick. Ongoing conversations with quality timely feedback, and that could be both recognition and it could be development feedback. Trust, autonomy and empowerment, which is about being able to carry on working from home and doing your best job. Opportunities to learn and grow, really important within the organization. Do we feel part of that organization? Do we feel that we belong, or we have a sense of fit with the organizational culture? Strengths-based conversations. So that's about, are we talking about things? Are we allowed to take on roles that fit with our strengths? We're encouraged to fit to our, to work with our strengths and play to our strengths. Or do you think it's really just down to your own natural state that you're somebody who's just naturally engaged, that regardless of all those other things, your engagement, you feel it really comes from within you? And all of these are relevant to some extent. It's just giving you a chance to choose. So if anyone else wants to choose their top one, I'll give you 2-3 more seconds, and then I'll share what it is. It's quite even, actually. And I will end and share the poll and have a look at your chat here. So the top one that 50% went for said it's trust, autonomy, and empowerment. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because if any of us have got a hybrid working policy, which gives the impression that we don't trust people, or we don't want to empower them, or we're going to take away their autonomy, that is going to potentially disengage. If you look at this, if you take this group, it's a relatively small group, but take us as being representative. Having a supportive manager, that's the other main driver of engagement, and giving people the skills. And in fairness, if you look at supportive manager, clarity of role, and ongoing conversations, you could argue all of those fit into a style of management. So having someone who recognizes you, gives feedback. If you're a manager, are you doing that? If you're in an organization, have your managers got the skills and awareness? Are they creating the time to do these things themselves? Are they having ongoing conversations? Are they giving recognition? Are they aligning with strategic purpose? So all of those things, that's critical. And it's almost, if you want some ideas as what to go, and then you've got opportunities to learn and grow, you've got some really straightforward things, which, to be honest, many of which would have fitted with an engagement webinar pre-pandemic, or an engagement webinar 15 years ago. But I don't think trust, autonomy, and empowerment was quite as big an expectation and wish. And it's basically because we've opened Pandora's box. People have had that, they were enforced to do it, and they don't want to lose it now. That's my theory. So let's see. Yeah, so someone who feels if they can work from home full time, why should they now have to go in 2 days a week? So this is where, why I say it's why. That's the why. So if you think about change management, well, why should they go into? Maybe it's different. Why would we want to, or why might we want to? So what are the benefits? And maybe what we need to do is persuade people. We need to invite people. We need to help people realize the benefits. Now, it could be that I should go in, 1 day a week in order to collaborate and share information, in order to help more junior members of staff get on, in order for me to be visible to people and advance my career. In order to take part in certain team activities, in order to, you name it, whatever it might be. But I think the key is people need to feel that there's something in it for them, right? What's in it for them, as opposed to the organization it feels like the organization doesn't like the fact that everyone's out of sight and they want control, and therefore you must come in 2 days a week. So it's how the message is put across, I think, is the key with these hybrid working policies. Again, if people have moved really far away, or again, it's fine to go for a purpose, training or workshop, but not worth it just to be on calls, which you can do from home. And you can see the logic, right? Why would people want to do that, to travel just to do that? And what really the message is, actually people's flexibility, their quality of life, you don't want to take that away, do you? So we don't want to take away that sense of autonomy that people feel they've got. So we have to try and make it much more something that people choose to do, want to do, treat people like adults. And that's the thing, Steve. So if people managers have become purely transactional, that's exactly the opposite of what we need them to be. I think if anything, people managers need to be more flexible at the moment. They needed to be more people oriented. So they were probably very task, I would say. People managers pre-pandemic were, I'm broadly generalizing, could get away with being pretty task focused. Then during the pandemic, we needed to be really people focused in order to look after well-being type issues. And now they need to be flexible, and maybe they need to be more, treat people like adults. They need to be persuade people to choose to do things. They need to set clear expectations that people are motivated to want to do, and they need to know what motivates the individual as an individual. And this is supported by the Gallup findings, which said that the line manager accounts for 70% of the variance in team engagement. This is their model here. I'm not sure I 100% agree with it, but they sort of said in the past it was about my salary, job satisfaction, my boss, my appraisal, my development gaps, my job. That was kind of the paradigm of the past. and the paradigms of the future. And this is where managers need to shift. And it's interesting, Steve's saying managers have become purely transactional. That if you looked at this slide here would suggest that managers have gone to the past as opposed to the future, which is where people want to be. And this webinar is about engagement. And therefore going to the future style is going to be more important, is what we really need people to be. So it's more about tapping into people's purpose. Individuals want to be in organizations that align with their values, their purpose. They can see that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. That's an increasingly engaging, important aspect. So the employer brand is important, not just for people being attracted to an organization, but for people wanting to stay with an organization. Individuals want to feel a sense of development, and they will actually choose development in some cases over salary and things like that. The manager as a coach, in order to do these things, it's less about the boss bossing you around. It's more about the manager coaching you and adapting their style to what your requirements are and understanding you. And that requires ongoing conversations, which sometimes we might talk about development, sometimes we might talk about objectives, sometimes we might talk about issues, but it's got a whole sort of a roundedness to the way we have these conversations. Future's about strengths, people playing to their strengths rather than gaps. So, working on improving your strengths, and it's about whole life rather than this segmentation. And certainly the whole sense of COVID, people being whole people that have kids and animals that come into calls, work calls, but are still able to contribute. So it's much more about this whole person persona rather than this is a job and these are the rules and this is how we'll do it. So that's if we want an engaged workforce. Gallup would be saying that you want line managers who are focusing more on this future type approach. These are the sort of skills, attributes and inclinations that the line managers need to be demonstrating, which may well mean that they need some support and development. So in terms of what's the issue if we don't do this, the impact of remote working? Well, the CIPD report says that engagement is the antithesis of burnout. And certainly in HR, there's lots of areas, and say HR, actually teachers, and any key workers are probably very close to burnout. You can't be engaged and burning out. So we have to make sure, first of all, I would say, is that people feel well. Talking of animals, that's dogs outside the door, not supposed to be upstairs. That's the squealing if you can hear a high-pitched squeaking. So engagement is the antithesis of burnout. So we need to make sure that people aren't burning out in the first place. What else can we do to actually accelerate that communication? Well, one of the things for me is making sure that we are, from a top-down approach, we are really communicating effectively. We need to be really inclusive and intentional about connecting people. So telling people what's going on, maybe sharing recognition, communicating to managers what's expected of managing in a hybrid environment, finding ways about connecting people and being intentional about when we do our team meetings, when we do one-to-ones, when we choose to be together and planning in advance. So whereas previously you might have been able to just bump into people, we need to create this environment of being more intentional so that we create more connections. And some of those, maybe those are remote or electronic. I actually interviewed a lady yesterday on the podcast, and I don't normally have people on that have got products, if you like, because it's not really meant to be promotional, but I'm not going to promote it. I just thought it sounded really cool. She's in America, and she's developed this training tool. She talked about psychological tools for engagement is what she was talking about. And it's essentially, she talked about as, you remember the game Truth or Dare? But it's obviously not as, you don't have to do any horrible dares, but they've developed this computer program where you could work online or you could be face to face as a team, and you have a topic, whether it's about values, and people are encouraged to ask questions and understand each other's values, and then they've gamified it in a way which you could then mark whether or not you think that person was being very open or whatever it is. I haven't played it, but I just thought the concept sounded really interesting as a tool that encourages people, even when they're a bit remote, just to get that closeness, to scratch below the transactional surface. And so that's just an example, but maybe we could think of things that you could do where, like, people, let's have a topic of the day. Tell me how you really feel about whatever it might be, and share that information. Because that's how people become close, is when you encourage people to open up. And when we're all being very transactional and we're going from one Zoom to the next, we don't really have that space. The tricky thing is that when people are working remotely, they actually don't want to come and do social bingo or anything like that either. So somehow along the line, we've got to contract with people to be intentional about having a sense of connecting and belonging. And perhaps that is about talking to your team, talking to your people and saying, well, what would make you feel part of this? What would engage you? We need to, have a sense of team that we can all draw on each other, and we have to trust each other and know each other to do that. So what could we do to make that happen more so? So my practical applications is really making sure that your managers, and also if it's top down, you have intentional, frequent communication, and ideally it's two-way communication where people share and open up about themselves. Find opportunities for social renewal, relationship building, and collaboration. And it's an awkward one because I think you've got to schedule them in advance, and it's almost, what is it? People, I have friends got a term, they hate having compulsory fun or organized fun. But there is something about, can you create something where people need to work together? There is a reason for people to develop their something together. So whether it's working on a project, whether it's discussing a topic, whether it's an information sharing, whether it's a learning lunch, but anything where you can encourage to break down those silos, and really, really recommend that people attend those things and don't isolate themselves. Because the tricky thing is, and with the increase in social anxiety that's out there at the moment, that actually once people get into that groove of actually staying away from others, even people who are quite extrovert, they become more and more comfortable with that and actually feel less and less comfortable about leaving it. And that almost can become a blocker about going in somewhere. Really is important to make sure that your line managers have the skills, the confidence, motivation to be giving clarity and feedback without affecting autonomy. So without making people feel they're not trusted. Also think about whether your remote culture is having any impact on the individual's sense of fit or belonging. So trying to help people see how they've got key strengths. So is there something where you could do a strengths, there's loads of strengths tools out there where you could find opportunities for people to contribute to things that fits with them for different projects. Could you go and do something as a voluntary project in different teams or groups? And fundamentally ask people what they want. What opportunities, opportunities for development and growth is a key driver of engagement, but what type of development or growth, because that is really highly subjective. So we've got to ask people. So the reality is that engagement is, there were 50 types, McLeod review said there were 50 types of engagement. There's probably 50 ways of engaging people, because actually it isn't one size fits all. And that means the role of the line manager, given that they drive 70% of engagement, has become even more important. Yet the skills of our managers have potentially become even lower, I suppose, or deprioritized, because they've become individual contributors as well. So if I was back in an organization thinking about what I would be able to do, then I would certainly be looking at, obviously talking to people what they want, but making sure that my line managers understand that the essentials of engagement, which are the same as they were 20 years ago, to be honest, clarity of purpose, opportunities to learn and grow, relationships at work, lots of the questions that would be in the original Gallup Q12 or whatever your Gallup survey is, that knowing that having that personal connection is absolutely essential. And in terms of getting people to come back to the office, if we don't want them to be disengaging, then I think it has to be what's in it for them. So it's maybe engaging with people saying, right, we need to have a sense of a culture. How many days a week would create a culture? We need to have somewhere that people feel a sense of belonging. Would you agree? And help get the idea of how it's managed, from the masses. Easier said than done, because it's so much easier just to have a policy and one size fits all. But I don't think that comes along with engagement. And of course, that is the purpose of this topic. So if anyone else has got any further comments or questions or observations that they'd be happy to share in the chat, please do feel free to do so. We've recorded this, so we'll send you a link to the recording, and we'll send you a link to the slides, and then if the also to the articles that I was talking about, which I've some drawn on from the point of this presentation. But don't underestimate what you can do. And actually, I will plug it again. People managers, particularly in the UK, have relatively low, they haven't had lots of investment in many cases. I appreciate I've got an international audience here, but maybe look at how skilled your people managers are, how self-aware they are in terms of what they need to do. And actually, I will promote one more product, sorry, but we've also got Product 360. Actually, that's a great tool for, if you've ever thought of 360 feedback, that is something that you can do, which would help people managers have greater self-awareness. So maybe they think that they're brilliant, but actually they don't ask for feedback. They don't actually have the awareness of where their gaps are. So 360 feedback can be a really, really good tool that you can use to do that. So I'll leave it open. Any more questions? If there are any questions or comments, please do feel free to pop them in there. In terms of our future, we've got a whole year's worth practically on the website of future webinars. So these are the topics that are coming up. It's more going to be about managing performance and engagement in a hybrid world. So that will be about people management. So it's aimed more at people managers. Leading culture change, that's about change, dealing with underperformance. We tend to do a strategic and a people management oriented topic. You'll get, Julie, as long as we've got your email, which we must have, I assume, because you've signed up, Caitlin will send an email out to you with all of these links on it and the slides, etc. Okay, and also here's the rest. And Mervyn, and here's the internal mobility report, driving employee engagement for 2021, which Mervyn wrote for us, and I think he's still on here. So, and actually, if anyone knows Mervyn Dimon, he's a thought leader in this area. So if anyone's got any questions for him, I'm sure we could check he's still there and ask them. You are, Mervyn. Yeah, so if anyone wants to ask Mervyn a question, I'm sure that he'd engage, but probably putting you all on the spot there. Yes, they're all recorded and they all go on the website. So when you get the link out from Caitlin, it will also have a link to previous recordings. No, none of these are chargeable, Julie. We run 2 webinars a month, which is totally free. The links will be on there, so you'll be able to go and see what's coming up. The things that are chargeable are our training programs here. So those things that you can sign up and they're chargeable. So if you want to send a manager on the training program, those are chargeable. But keep an eye out, because we've got a special offer on coming through in May, where you can send 3 people for the price of 2. And if you wanted to sign up before then, I'm sure you could grab a place. So thank you very much for joining, everybody. Really appreciate your interaction. It makes it a lot easier when you chat away as you have done. Thanks again. I'll just see if there's any other questions. Oh, thank you, Orlando. Yeah, it would be interesting to think how you can do it, though. I think with your people, any tips for engaging students, because you don't manage them, do you? But trust and empowerment, maybe getting people to talk about how you trust them, you know, that sort of thing. Any other thoughts, guys, just before anyone drops off, as to how Dr. Orlando how do you really engage a student? Help them purpose, help them see how what they're learning is going to connect to their future role or future making a difference, that sort of thing. I'm sure you knew them all, Mervyn, but always good to come over other stuff, isn't it? And to have a look at it with a fresh perspective. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to stop there, and I hope to see some of you on a future webinar.